Did your military service cause, aggravate, or contribute to your current disability? Here lies the central question that the VA must answer when determining if your disability is service-connected. Obviously, while a yes means the VA agrees with your claim, a denial does not necessarily mean that your service did not contribute to your disability. In essence, what it means is that based on the evidence that the VA evaluated, in their judgment, service connectivity was not established. So today, we're going to do a deeper dive in how to strengthen your case for service connectivity. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to evidence over judgment. Welcome back. My name is Mike. I'm a 28-year Army veteran who also served as a County Veteran Service Officer for several years. And so today we're going to cover what I call step 4 in the VA disability claims process, and that is where we look at service connectivity. Note, as before, this is not legal advice. This is me sharing my perspectives, my knowledge from experience as a county VSO, but also as a veteran who filed their own claims. First, again, to start off with, I want to reiterate what I've brought up before, is when filing your VA claim, do not assume anything. As we discussed previously, there are over 1,000 different issues that can be, or conditions that can be service connected, over 15 different bodily systems. Also, there are over 800 military occupational specialties throughout the force and over 4,100 duty positions. So for us to expect the VA to be an expert of each one of those disabilities and each one of those duty positions is beyond reason. They do not know what you did from day to day. They do not know about your deployment. So it's key that you provide that information to the VA so they make the ruling in your favor. All right, so let's do a quick review. The methodology, I always use what I call the three-legged stool. First leg is obviously eligibility, and that is for eligibility based upon credible federal military service, normally your DD-214. Second leg is a current and medically verifiable disability. Third is the bridge, the nexus. It's the showing of the evidence where your service, A, caused B, your current medically verifiable disability, the bridge. And that's what we'll go over today. So far there are several steps. The first step that I always use is 1, the intent to file. Second step is to identify all potential current disabilities to include scars, diseases, previous injuries that may be qualified for service-connected disability. Step 3 is to analyze, prioritize, and develop with the goal of getting these to be claim ready, where they are medically verifiable by a medical professional. Those last 2 steps, which we did in previous videos, relate to the second leg of the stool. So now step 4 is we start going over service connectivity, the third leg, the most elusive, the one where most veterans are denied during their actual claim process. So, starting with the very first question that you should ask yourself is, how did my service cause my current disability? You should be able to answer this question and try to keep it short in 2 to 3 sentences. The challenge is, if you have trouble articulating how your service caused your disability, finding the evidence to support your theory is going to be much more difficult. And obviously, it'll make it harder for the VA to make that connection. So start with that question, and you need to come up with your basic theory on how your service, based upon your experiences, you were there, caused your current disability. Note, your answer to this question will help also guide you to maybe what category of service connectivity are you going for. For example, I have ischemic heart disease. It was caused by exposure to Agent Orange in Vietnam. So you know that's going to be a presumptive where your desire or your need for evidence is going to be based upon a lot on proving that you had boots on the ground. Others, such as, could be direct. I separated my shoulder while in the service, and it continues, and I developed arthritis. So you can look for maybe service treatment records and your current treatment records from your primary caregiver. Next question you need to ask, we covered some of this already, is what evidence do I need to support my claim? What do I have currently in my possession? What do I need, and where do I get it? Now, there's a wide array of evidence available, and it's going to be contingent upon what you're applying for, the category of service connectivity. But it can range from, obviously, your service treatment records. It can be awards, it can be orders, it can be lay statements, your own 4138, unit histories we've used before, whatever information. When you analyze what caused it, what evidence do you need to show to the VA? One point I'd like to make at this stage is a lot of people will say you need a nexus letter right now. That's how they answer that first question of what evidence do I need to support my claim. I tend to have a different philosophy about the nexus letter. The nexus letter is not a golden ticket. It is not a magic document. It is the medical opinion by a medical professional saying that more than likely A caused B. It is a very strong document, but it's not a single document that can make your case. And what I would often like to do is have the nexus letter come at the end. We request it at the end of the evidence development. So that way we can use that to present to the doctor. This is a very, very important step, is the nexus letter. And so my next video I will dedicate to doing a deeper dive on the nexus letter, to cover what it is, how to develop what it should say, and even how to ask the doctor to write one. So we'll cover that one. Next step is identifying and also debunking alternative causes for your disability. When the VA says it's not service connected, they may tell you, basically they're saying your evidence hasn't supported your theory, but they don't always go into what other things could have happened that would have caused your disability. And just to give an example where this really hit home with me personally, I was going to a CNP exam, compensation and pension exam, for my, and had a high impact collision, and I had several issues, dental issues. And so out of curiosity, with my conversation with the doctor, I asked, what other reasons are out there that could have caused this? And he said, well, the most common is grinding of teeth. And I said, but I don't grind my teeth. I said, I want you to put that into your notes, that the service member says that he doesn't grind his teeth. I can get a letter from my wife that will confirm that I've never ground my teeth. And I said, also, if I was a person who was going to grind my teeth that often, there would be physical evidence on my in my teeth that shows that I constantly ground them. So from that point forward, I learned that it's not as just as much as when you make your case of what you believe it is. You should address on what other options are out there and try to debunk those or counter those actual causes. So at this point, I'd like to, on service connectivity, I would like to share with you an experience I had with a veteran who came to my office seeking a disability claim. He had been to his county VSO and basically was told there's nothing he could do for him. He directed him to try to get a nexus letter, but the nexus letter by the doctor was denied. So he came in with his wife and they sat down and we started discussing. The first thing we did, step one, we completed the intent to file. Second, we reviewed what disabilities he could claim, and we narrowed it down to really the main one, especially for this example, was hearing loss. And so he wore hearing aids. And so I said, do you have a current a test for those hearing aids? And he said he had one month prior. I said, good, we want to get a copy of that. That will be a current a diagnosis of your current condition. So he was elderly, and I said, when did you actually leave the service? And he said, 1957. So I said, that's a 65-year gap between now, this was 2022, and the time you left the service. And we're going to try to make the connectivity from your service to today. I said, fine, let's get started. So I first asked him, he didn't have his DD-214 with him, was what did you do in the service? He said, I was in the Air Force and I was a jet engine mechanic. I said, okay. I said, did you do that your entire 3 years that you were in, or did you change jobs? And he said, no, I did that for the entire time of my service. I said, okay, I want you to go home and we're going to develop a chronology and also some background information. The first question I want you to address is, what was the intensity of the noise that you were exposed to? Obviously, it was a jet engine mechanic. And probably when you stepped away from the jet engine, you were on a very noisy flight line. And he always nodded in agreement. So that's the first one, is intensity. Second, I want you to tell me about the duration of the exposure. When you went to the flight line, when you went to work on engines, were you there for 4 hours a day, 8 hours a day, 11 hours a day? What was the duration of your exposure on an average day, but also maybe for days if y'all actually deployed? Was the duration 11 hours, 12 hours, 16 hours during actual deployments? Capture all of that. So the third was the frequency. How often were you on the flight line? How often were you repairing engines over your 3 years of service? Were you there 5 days a week? Were you there 6 days a week? Were there periods when you deployed when it was 7 days a week for a month straight? I want you to capture that. So we're going to capture intensity, duration of exposure, and frequency of exposure over the 3 years we're there. And I said the last one I want you to write down, especially covering that period, is hearing protection. What hearing protection were you authorized or given to help you with it? Cotton balls or headsets or whatever? And he said no. He says most of the time we had field expedients. They would break off filters of cigarettes and stick those in the ears as a hearing protection. So okay, we're going to capture that. And I said, when you left the service, were you given a hearing test? And he says no, and he did not even receive any of his service treatment records when he departed, which was probably common back in 1957. He said, okay, all right, so I want you to capture all of that down and write it down chronologically. All right, so I think you have a great case for the exposure to cause hearing loss, but now we have the challenge of building what is basically a 65-year bridge from today back to 1957. So first question, I said, obviously you're wearing hearing aids. How long have you been wearing hearing aids? And he said 13 years. I said, okay, that takes us back to 2009. When you got the hearing aids, was this your first one, or did you ever do any tests before then? And he said, I did test first before then. So my first test was 10 years prior to that. So I'm saying, okay, 1999. I said, we'll want those copies of those medical records of your initial test and also the one where you were authorized to get hearing aids. So I said, what this does is establishes a medical record of his disability, at least starting in 1999 through present, that his disability can be medically verifiable. So we basically cut that was just those couple questions, we cut that bridge by 1/3. So the next question I ask him is, knowing, especially with people like his generation, they ignore certain inconveniences or disabilities. I said, when did you finally come to terms with the fact that you actually had a hearing loss? And he quickly said 1990, explained about a family function, grandkids, so on and so forth. So all right, so at least in 1990s when you finally admitted that you had a hearing problem, but you still waited 9 years to get your hearing test done, which is understandable. So if you admitted it in 1990, when did you start noticing that you had problems hearing? He said, well, at least the last 5 or 6 years before that. I said, okay, that takes us back to 1984, of when you really admitted to noticing that you had a hearing loss. So then I turned to his wife, who had been copiously taking notes, and I asked her, I said, when did you first tell him that he had a hearing loss and he needed hearing aids? And she'd been following the conversation. She knew what was coming, and she said 1975 is when I finally told him that he needed to get his hearing checked because he couldn't hear anything, or that he's having problems hearing. I said, fine. So that takes us to 1975. How long before that did you notice signs of him not hearing? She said she thought 3 to 4 years before that. Loud TV, maybe ignored me, that I just sort of noticed, but I did not say anything until 1995. I said, okay, that takes us back to basically 1971. So in essence, we had built the bridge. We only needed a 14-year bridge, because we had built the evidence, at least in our view, one, about how long he had had the medical disability, starting in 1999 when he had the test, his own statements of admitting to and ignoring, going back to about 1984, and then his wife's lay statement, taking it back to 75, when she said something, and back to about 71. So we reduced that bridge from a 65-year bridge to only needing a 14-year bridge, in which, based upon his exposure and all the other items we discussed about the intensity, frequency, and duration, made a very strong case. But I wasn't finished, so I asked him, I said, okay, when you left the service, what did you do professionally? And he said, I went back into the family business. It was retail. I said, so it wasn't high noise exposure type of operation? And he said, no. I said, did you have any hobbies that were like fixing cars, racing cars, motorcycles, heavy machinery, things that would also impact your? And he said, no. I said, okay, we want to capture that since you left service, you were not exposed to high intensity noises that could have also contributed to your hearing loss. So I told him to go back, put those items together, send them to me. We will work it and help them do the writing and everything as required. And we did not ask for a nexus letter. We thought we had enough evidence. And fortunately, we packaged his claim, we sent it in, and not even to our surprise, as expected, the VA concurred with the evidence that we presented, that his service actually contributed to his current disability, even though there was a 65-year gap. Just a note on this. Now you can see why a VSO may reject his claim. He just walked in and said, without doing the homework, without doing the drill down, is, hey, I want to service connect my hearing. I got out of service 65 years ago. Same if you presented that to a doctor saying, please write me a nexus letter saying that my service 65 years ago caused the hearing loss I have today. So if you presented that to either one without the drill down, without the background information that we put together, you could see where many would say that there is no case. So, in summary, step 4 isn't about assembling the evidence. As we said before, each disability is its own line of effort. You develop them separately along their own pathway, along their own pace. Each disability must be proven. You want to know what evidence you need to support the claim. You want to analyze it. You want to determine your theory. You want to build the bridge. Don't assume anything. And not only do you want to connect the dots, you want to draw the dots. So at the end of the day, it is evidence that wins over judgment. Again, I want to thank you. My name is Mike, and if there's any other issues or topics you would like me to cover, I'd be more than happy to do so. Just please put the comments in the sections below. Thank you.